In this video, I take this greasy, grimy mess of a cylinder head and I turn it into this shining beauty. I take this 94,000 mile has-been to a gleaming new looking must-have. Thank you for watching and welcome to another episode of Punto How To. As I just explained in this video, I'm going to be looking at the second part in my series of restoring and rebuilding this Fiat Punto engine. The workshop's a bit of a mess right now, so rather than muck about telling you about what I'm going to do, let's just jump in and do it. If you've been following the series, you will know that this car, when I obtained it, was lacking in power and I didn't have any history on it. Before I spend any money on restoring the bodywork of the car, I want to make sure that I've got a good engine to start with. In the last video, if you have been following, you will know that we managed to get the cylinder head off without too many issues, but it did highlight a number of problems along the way. We discovered that the head gasket was leaking between the oil and coolant channels. We discovered that the inside of the engine was just covered in gunge and gunk from poor servicing. And possibly most importantly, we discovered that the timing was out between the top of the engine and the bottom of the engine. To clean this up, I need to strip it down. So first of all, we're going to remove the valves and springs and all the other little bits from this cylinder head so that we can start cleaning things. I've taken a piece of cardboard which I've marked up with the location of all the valves so that when I take them out, I can make sure they go back in the same place that they were removed from. Removal of the valves is actually very easy with one of these valve spring compressors. I bought this one from Amazon. It was possibly around £10, but I'll pop a link in the description below and maybe up on the screen now so that you can see where to buy one if you need one for yourself. I brace one end of the valve spring compressor against the bottom of the valve and then I screw the other end down onto the spring to compress the spring from above. You can then remove these tiny collets from the top of the valve stem which secure the valve in place. Once they're removed, the valve is free from the spring and you can remove the spring from one end and the valve from the other. And I store each of my valves in this marked piece of cardboard so I know exactly where to put them all back. Next up, I remove the valve stem oil seals. This tool just grips the oil seal and you pull it up to release it. And finally, I remove the thermostat from the end of the cylinder head. Next up was the cleaning process. I whacked it in the dishwasher on a 75-degree wash, which is the most powerful wash my dishwasher does. I should add that I gave it a good scrub and a clean of anything loose before I put it in the dishwasher, but after a couple of rounds in the dishwasher, it came out looking like this. I then set about polishing the cylinder head with finer and finer grades of wet and dry sandpaper to really get the shine into the metal. This is a very slow and laborious task. What you're seeing is the culmination of a couple of weeks' work. I also bought this rather nifty set of tiny die grinding bits that fit in a Dremel. These were again about £10 on Amazon. I'll pop a link in the description below and up at the top of the screen now. And what I did with these die grinder pieces was very carefully remove any of the leftover moulding marks from inside the intake and exhaust ports and all the rough surfaces as well. This does help the airflow a little better, but it's not really going to cause any major performance gains. This is again very slow and laborious work, and I probably did this over 2 or 3 nights. I would just say take your time with it, and you have to be really careful not to touch the valve seats with any of the tools, because if you do, you will need to get the valve seats replaced. With that underway, I needed to clean up the valves themselves, so taking them in pairs from my card, I put them through the ultrasonic cleaning bath, which got rid of most of the contaminants and dirt. Here's a before and after of one of the inlet valves, and you can see how much difference it makes going through the ultrasonic cleaning bath. Most of the work is done by the cleaning bath itself, but I did use a mild detergent in order to clean everything up and get the oil and grease off the parts. The exhaust valves were by far the worst. This is before cleaning and there's about 2 or 3 millimeters of dirt on the back of the valves. This shows one of the exhaust valves after a stint in the ultrasonic cleaning bath, and you can see there's still a lot of grime on the back of the valve. It was so thick, in fact, it would have been impeding the exhaust flow out of the engine, so it's a good job that I am cleaning this up and getting it all stripped out so that the engine can breathe properly. And this is the same exhaust valve after being cleaned up with finer and finer grades of sandpaper. At this point in the video, I wanted to just take a break and thank you for watching. If you haven't already done so, do consider subscribing if you are enjoying the video. Otherwise, give us a thumbs up, give us a comment in the comments section below. It's just great to hear from you and know that you are watching. Back to the video. before we can get to this nice clean and crisp cylinder head, we have a hell of a lot more work to do, so let's jump back into it. This work all took a very long time. It's about 3 weeks since I took the cylinder head off now, and it's time to start putting things back together. The first point in our reassembly is making sure that we've got a good gas seal when we put everything back together, so we need to grind the valves back into the cylinder head. I'm not particularly an expert in this, and it is something that I had to learn as I was going along. I have done some valve grinding before. It's also sometimes called valve lapping. You use a grinding paste, which you can see in these little white pots on the table in front of me, and they are different grades. We've got a coarse grain and a fine grain. You smear the paste onto the valve where it meets the valve seat in the cylinder head, and then using this little suction stick thingy, you use your hands to grind the valve backwards and forwards so that it then grinds the two metal surfaces together, creating a near perfect seal. This is yet another one of those jobs that takes hours and hours and hours, and you have to be very careful with the paste to make sure it doesn't end up anywhere that you don't want it, because if this stuff gets into circulation in the engine, it will destroy the engine very quickly. The valves need to be really clean for this little suction stick thing to actually stick to them. I found that using a bit of carb cleanup to clean the valves in between each use was a really good way to make sure that the suction cup would stick each time. I did at one point in the process switch to using one of these drill type valve grinding tools. This thing was rubbish, it didn't work, it broke within about 5 minutes of using it. I wouldn't recommend it. Just stick with doing it by hand. It's the best way to do it and you'll get the best results. I use some fresh engine oil on the valve stem before I put it into the cylinder head to make sure that it's nice and lubricated. We drop that in and give it a little turn to make sure that it is that oil is spread around. I smear a little bit of the coarse grinding paste on the backside of the valve before dropping the valve down, and then with the tool with the suction cup on the end of the wooden stick, just rotate the valve backwards and forwards and lift it up to keep the grinding paste in between the valve and the valve seat. I probably spent a good 10 to 15, maybe even 20 minutes on each valve, just to make sure I've got a really good seal. Once I was happy with the seal on the valves, I put the spark plugs in the underside of the cylinder head, and then I put some water into the cylinder head to test the seal. I then left this overnight to see how much of the water would run out by the next day. The next day we had a really good seal on all of the valves. We didn't need to do any further grinding, so we can now start putting the cylinder head back together properly. In our head gasket kit we had a complete new set of valve stem oil seals. First I need to put these little metal shims in place. These protect the soft aluminium cylinder head from the hard metal steel springs. I can then put the valve stem oil seals in place and then push them down firmly with the tool that we used earlier to remove them. This grips the sides of the valve stem oil seal tightly, but it doesn't damage the valve stem oil seal as you push it down. All 16 valves get a new oil seal and everything is pushed down and snugged down into place. It's now time to put the springs over the back of the valves. We put the little cap in place. We bring our valve spring compressor in and start to twist it down and compress that spring so that we can get our collet in the top of the valve. These are quite fiddly, so a little bit of oil will help here. The surface tension of the oil helps stick the collet to the valve. Once they are nicely in place, you can release the pressure on the valve spring compressor, and that is the valve fully installed in the head. Here's a nice close-up of installing those collets into the valve stem. As you can see, it's quite fiddly work. At this point I'd resorted to using a pair of very fine point tweezers. You can see how the surface tension of the oil helps stick the collet to the actual valve stem, and the sort of cone-like shape of the collets helps lock the valve in place as you release the tension on the valve spring. And we repeat this process over and over again until all 16 valves are reinstalled back in the cylinder head. I have a brand new thermostat to reinstall in the cylinder head with a new thermostat gasket. That's just attached with two 10mm bolts. Apologies that this video footage is a little bit out of focus. I didn't realise until after the filming that it had been out of focus. I have lovely new inlet manifold gasket, so I pop that in place, and that is followed by the inlet manifold. which, as you can see here, goes over the studs in the cylinder head, and there are about 9 nuts that secure the inlet manifold in place. And here she is, one completed cylinder head ready to go back in the car. Incredibly satisfying to get it to this stage, and it looks fantastic, so I can't wait to get it back in the car and see what difference it makes. The final thing before reassembly is to put the hydraulic lifters in our ultrasonic cleaning bath. This is the best way to get the cleaning detergent into every little tiny space inside these lifters. We have our new head gasket in place and ready to go. I've also cleaned all the carbon deposits off the top of the pistons. We've also treated it to a new cambelt tensioner and water pump. So the cylinder head is all back together, it is ready to go in the engine. What I would suggest now is that if you are interested in following this further, you might enjoy this video here. Otherwise, you might want to go back and check the previous episode by watching this video here. That's it for today's video. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.